So today we're going to talk about a set of ideas so powerful they didn't just tweak history, they literally built the modern world we live in. We're diving deep into the Age of Enlightenment, a true revolution of the mind that still shapes everything from our governments to how we even think about ourselves. All right, let's get into it.
But to really get a grip on that massive transformation, let's start with a question about our own time. I mean, it can really feel like we're living through this period of just unprecedented chaos, right? But what if I told you that all this turmoil might actually be part of a predictable, recurring pattern?
You know, there's this fascinating theory, made popular by historians Neil Howe and William Strauss, that suggests history moves in cycles, kind of like the seasons. Each one of these cycles lasts about 80 to 100 years, so roughly a long human life, and it's made up of 4 totally distinct stages, or as they call them, turnings. So the cycle kicks off with a high, this era of stability and confidence. That's followed by an awakening, which is a time of spiritual questioning and a little bit of rebellion. Then comes the unraveling, where it's all about the individual and those big institutions start to crumble. And it all leads to a crisis, a really decisive and honestly dangerous era where the old way of doing things gets swept away to make room for something new. Now, according to this theory, we are smack in the middle of a crisis right now. And that brings up a huge question. If we're trying to get through a major turning point today, what was the engine behind the last one? You know, the one that brought down monarchies and gave birth to modern democracy? Well, the answer is a single, world-changing intellectual movement.
So, let's rewind the clock. We're going back to the late 17th and 18th centuries. Europe is just starting to poke its head out from under centuries of dogma and the absolute rule of kings. And right into this world steps the hero of our story, the Enlightenment.
The core mission of the Enlightenment was, and I am not exaggerating, breathtakingly ambitious. The whole idea was to use the power of the human mind, our ability to think logically and to observe the world, to question everything about society, and then rebuild it on a more rational, more humane foundation. I mean, nothing was sacred, not government, not religion, not even science. The philosopher Immanuel Kant just nailed the spirit of the age with this motto, sapere aude. It means dare to know. It was basically a call to arms for your brain, telling people to break free from what he called their self-incurred tutelage. You know, that habit of just letting other people do your thinking for you and actually have the courage to use your own reason.
And listen, this was not just some abstract philosophical game. Thinkers of the Enlightenment were literally drawing up practical blueprints for a completely new kind of society, one that was designed not to serve kings or gods, but to serve the people themselves. Now, what's so wild about this slide is just the sheer scale of this shift. The old idea was the king gets his power straight from God. End of story. You were a subject, and your job was to obey. But the new idea, pushed by thinkers like John Locke, was absolutely revolutionary. A government's power comes only from the consent of the governed. You're not a subject, you're a citizen, and you are born with rights. Rights to life, liberty, and property. This is it. This is the intellectual DNA of modern democracy.
And these ideas, they went viral. But they didn't spread because a king said so. They spread through what we now call a public sphere. People were debating them in coffeehouses in London, in the fancy salons of Paris, and through this absolute flood of new books and pamphlets. Most famously, Diderot's Encyclopedia, which literally tried to cram all of human knowledge into one place.
Okay, but here's where the story gets really complicated. Because this amazing revolution of the mind, it was tragically, deeply incomplete. For all its beautiful words about freedom and reason, the Age of Enlightenment was built on some profound and, frankly, painful contradictions.
And the impact was explosive. These ideas didn't stay in books, they fueled actual, real-world revolutions. You see it in America, you see it in France, and, this is so important, you see it in Haiti, where enslaved people took this idea of liberty to its most logical conclusion, and they threw off their French masters to create the world's first black republic.
And yet, the hypocrisy was just staggering. This slide lays out the central conflict of the whole era perfectly. The very same men who wrote that all men are created equal were in many cases slave owners themselves. The beautiful ideal of liberty existed right alongside the brutal reality of the slave trade, and while they talked a big game about universal rights, those rights were pretty much exclusively for white, property-owning men.
And there was another huge challenge to the Enlightenment, this one coming from inside European culture itself. You know, for every intellectual action, there's always a reaction. And the intense focus on cold, hard reason inevitably sparked a powerful, passionate counter-movement. It was called Romanticism. And look, if the Enlightenment was a revolution of the head, Romanticism was a revolution of the heart. It celebrated everything that reason seemed to be ignoring: our emotions, our intuition, our imagination, and the wild, untamable spirit of nature.
I mean, the contrast here is just night and day. For the Enlightenment, nature was like a giant clockwork machine that you could take apart and understand. But for the Romantics, no way. Nature was this living, spiritual force that you had to experience. And this created this deep tension in Western thought, this ongoing debate between the head and the heart, between logic and emotion, that we honestly still feel today.
Which brings us right back where we started, full circle, to our current moment. By understanding the intellectual engine that powered the last great crisis, we might just get some insight into our own. Because those old conflicts, they haven't really gone away. In fact, some thinkers today are trying to pull off a new synthesis. There's this movement, sometimes called scientific neo-romanticism, that basically argues that a deep scientific understanding of the universe, from the incredible complexity of a single cell to the birth of a star, it doesn't have to get rid of our sense of wonder. In fact, it can be the very source of it. And so that leaves us with one final, really crucial question. The last great crisis, the last fourth turning, it was powered by the Enlightenment's radical ideas about liberty, reason, and individual rights, and it totally remade the world, for better and for worse. So, as we try to navigate our own perilous time of transformation, what are the big ideas fueling us? What new blueprints for society are being drawn up right now, and where on earth are they going to lead?